For centuries, one metal stood above all, respected, coveted, trusted. It gleamed in temples and crowned kings. It anchored empires, backed currencies, and seemed immutable. That metal was gold. But then, in a moment barely noticed by most, its throne was stripped away. Not by war, not by accident, but by a quieter force: debt, a system of promises, IOUs, and paper that rose to replace the weight and luster of gold. Today we tell the hidden story of how gold lost its reign in, how debt quietly took over the world as money. Why did it happen? Who stood to gain? And what does it mean for us now, in an era where money is nothing but digital digits backed by nothing more than belief and credit? The answer lies buried in history, in moments few remember. But if you listen carefully, you'll hear the echoes of that shift hand the blueprint of what may be coming next. In the beginning, humans used many things as money: shells, beads, copper, silver. But gold had something unique: rarity, durability, beauty, resilience. It didn't rust. It didn't spoil. And for millennia, there was no better store of value. As early societies grew, coins made of gold carried kings' faces. They represented power, sovereignty, and trust. As trade expanded across continents, gold's appeal only increased. By the 17th and 18th centuries, in places like Britain, gold increasingly formed the backbone of money. The reason was both practical and symbolic. The stock of gold was limited. You couldn't magically create more of it. That meant money backed by gold carried an implicit discipline. In 1717, for example, Isaac Newton, as master of the mint, helped fix the guinea at 21 shillings, inadvertently sealing Britain on a de facto gold standard path. The system meant that if you held banknotes, you could, in principle, redeem them for gold. Governments had to keep gold reserves. Currencies were anchored by the later 19th century. Many advanced economies adopted what is called the classical gold standard, a period roughly from the 1870s to the outbreak of World War I. Under this system, every currency unit was defined in terms of a fixed amount of gold. Convertibility was maintained. Trade balances were settled in gold. The story seems stable, even elegant. For decades, gold reigned, but its reign contained the seeds of its decline. Because gold, while strong, is inflexible. When economies grew fast, wars ravaged, debts mounted, the gold system creaked. And yet, the assumption held: money must be backed by something real, something like gold. As industrialization expanded, wars grew larger. Governments needed ever greater sums. To raise these sums, they had to borrow loans, bonds, paper promises. These concepts matured. Credit became currency. The late 19th and early 20th centuries brought a shift. Money was not only gold, but increasingly credit. Take the United States, for example. The Coinage Act of 1873 quietly ended the free coinage of silver, strengthening gold's dominance. Yet even as gold became more central, paper money and banknotes proliferated. The promise of convertibility remained, but the underlying fabric was changing. As soon as debts became big and government obligations large, the logic of gold backing began to conflict with practical policy. During and after the Great War, World War I, nations suspended gold printed paper money, borrowed heavily, and built enormous debt loads. The system strained, and yet gold still held symbolic status. It was the anchor but one that governments were loosening behind closed doors. In the interwar period, two things happened simultaneously. Debt exploded, and the gold standard faltered. Countries tried to return to gold, but the pressure of debt, deficits, currency flows made full convertibility impossible. The system broke. Debt had become part of the monetary architecture. What was once a rare metal became one pillar among many, and the promise of redemption in gold began to fade. The breaking point came not with a single explosion, but with incremental ruptures culminating in monumental decisions. In the United States, for example, a key moment arrived on April 5, 1933, when Franklin D. Roosevelt ordered gold coins and certificates above certain denominations turned in. Restricting private gold ownership, the Gold Reserve Act of 1934 then changed the official price of gold, devaluing the dollar relative to gold to stabilize the economy. The classical gold standard had already collapsed. The convertibility promise was broken. After World War II, the world attempted a new structure. The Bretton Woods Conference in 1944 created a system in which the dollar was linked to gold at $35 per ounce. And other currencies were pegged to the dollar. Gold still retained significant status, but the dollar became the dominant reserve currency. Then came August 15, 1971. Richard Nixon announced the suspension of dollar convertibility into gold, effectively ending even the gold-anchored dollar regime. In that moment, the throne of gold was abandoned. Money was no longer backed by gold. Instead, it was backed to be fueled by. Why did this happen? Because the burden of debts, deficits, and promises had grown far beyond what the physical gold stock could support. Trust in paper, in credit, in institutions became the new anchor. A chain reaction of debt expansion, financial engineering, and global capital flows made the old gold standard incompatible. Gold lost its practical dominance. Debt became the fabric of modern money. With the gold standard gone, the world entered a new era. Fiat currencies, credit systems, central banks with sweeping powers. Money became something created by decree and credit, not constrained by gold mines. The implications were massive. Governments and central banks could now print and issue currency without direct gold backing. That meant greater flexibility, but also greater risk. Inflation, debt accumulation, speculation all expanded. The promise of money backed by gold was replaced by money backed by belief in credit. Economies would never be the same. Second, the relationship between debt and money deepened. Banks created money through lending. Governments borrowed. Financial institutions leveraged. The system became dynamic, interconnected, and complex. Third, crises became more frequent and severe. Without the discipline of gold, monetary expansion, excesses, and mismatches flourished. The financial architecture changed. Too big to fail became a norm. Bailouts became expected. Debt forgiveness turned into policy tools. Yet gold didn't disappear. It retained symbolic value, a hedge, a reserve asset. Central banks still hold gold. Investors still admire it, but its role changed from backbone to backup. Meanwhile, debt took center stage, fundamentally transforming money. Over the decades, many reforms aimed to fix the system. Regulation of banks, deposit insurance, monetary policy tools, new reserve regimes, quotas, floating exchange rates, but each fix addressed symptoms more than architecture. When debt crises erupted like the Latin American debt crisis, the Asian financial crisis, the global financial crisis of 2008, the response was always new credit, new guarantees, bailouts, rather than a return to the old constraints. The system adapted, but the fundamental shift remained. Gold was no longer king. Debt ruled. For example, economists argue that the gold standard helped prolong and deepen the Great Depression because it prevented monetary policy flexibility. The lesson: tying money to gold can restrict solutions when things go wrong. But the alternative, fiat and debt, brings its own vulnerabilities. The issue is not solved, only replaced with new challenges. Reform after reform came. Central bank oversight, banking regulations, global institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. But these are frameworks for debt, not a return to gold backing. The throne of gold stayed empty. Debt filled the room, and every time the system teetered, the answer was more debt. Today we live in a world where global debt exceeds $320 trillion, far surpassing global GDP. The U.S. national debt, consumer debt, corporate debt, derivatives, they form the backbone of the financial system. The role of gold is now secondary. Central banks still accumulate gold, but they accumulate debt instruments too. In recent years, gold has surged, but not to reclaim its throne, rather as a hedge against the debt-saturated era. We see repeating patterns: credit booms, asset bubbles, debt piling up, policy interventions, bailouts. Money is created, liberalized, leveraged, and converted into risk. Gold might shine, but debt drives the system. Just as the transition once happens in silence gold, the next transition may already be underway. Digital currencies, central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, algorithmic money backed by debt, data, and code. The architecture is shifting again, and the lessons from the era when gold lost its throne apply. When the foundation changes, The consequences ripple for decades. More shockingly, countries and institutions holding gold may feel secure, but their money is still surrounded by debt. The physical anchor is gone. The new anchors, credit and promise. And promises can break. Gold's era as the anchor of global money was not eternal. It was overtaken by the scale, complexity, and flexibility of debt. Money without gold back and rose because debt could expand where gold could not. Debt is not an accident of monetary history. It became the currency's engine. Once gold lost its role, credit, leverage, and debt became the structural foundation of modern finance. The fact that many reforms tried and failed to restore gold-style discipline means we now live with a system built on promises. That means stability depends not on gold mines but on institutional trust, policy frameworks, and debts. Here's the warning. If money's foundation shifted from gold to debt once, it can shift again. The next era may not be backed by metal ore, merely by credit but by data, algorithms, and control. In that case, the hidden power isn't in vaults or gold bars, it's in networks and debt. The open question, if gold lost its throne because debt became king, who will dethrone debt? And what will the next foundation of money look like? Perhaps a system backed by nothing but trust, or by something no one expects. We may be standing on another transition even now, and history warns us not to take our monetary structure for granted. If this story changed how you see money, if you now understand the moment when gold lost its reign and debt quietly stepped into its place, then this is just the beginning. Don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into how money, power, and history intertwine. Like this video, if you believe money is more than metal, share your thoughts below. What do you think backs money in the next era? Is gold still relevant? Is debt still dominant? Let's discuss. Because the throne may have changed hands once, and it may change again. The question is, will you see it when it happens?